Julian Birkinshaw, many of you are familiar with in terms of one of our star faculty. There is a list called the Thinkers 50 list, the 50 sort of management gurus in the world, voted on independently. And we are proud to have a lot of those at London Business School. Julian is part of the 50 thinkers list. I have never been part of the thinkers list. You know, I still have mountains to climb in this respect. But it's not just because, people like his style. It's also very much, he's an immensely thoughtful academic, also highly applied, someone who people listen to with great attention. So it's with immense pleasure that I hand over to Julian and to Mike. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Andrew, for your generous introduction. My job is to pose the questions. I mean, it's election season, so perhaps a few of you are expecting a Jeremy Paxman-style interview. That will not be my style. I assured Mike that he's amongst friends. But we are going to dig deep into some meaty issues. I was looking over your CV, and of course, there's so many things we could talk about. I thought we'd focus on two major topics, and we're going to talk for about 30 or 40 minutes before opening up for questions. The first one is BT, British Telecom, as it was formerly known, because BT is in the middle of just a fascinating transformation itself, but also an industry which itself is also going through a major transformation. So I want to dig a little bit deep into BT and its strategy. And then I wanted to turn to kind of contemporary issues in terms of the relationship between business and society, and specifically, of course, a fairly UK-centric conversation with the election looming. This is obviously with your hat on as the head of the CBI. For the non-British people in the room, Confederation of British Industry. It is the voice of business for the rest of society, essentially. So Mike really does represent the voice, the opinions of business, how it relates to the whole policy agenda and the big battles that are underway for the next government. And then I've got a few little questions at the end if we've got time. So let's start with BT. Look, for those of you who have long memories, BT, it's been a fixture in the UK economy forever, and it's gone through a number of turnarounds over its life. I wanted to focus on the one that happened, as it were, on your watch, which was around 2007, 2008. Clearly, there was the kind of the overstretch into the global services business, a number of financial difficulties. Tell us what you did in terms of coming out of that crisis, the choices you made, the major kind of bets you made on trying to steer BT into the opportunities that we're facing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it might be worth just going back a few months. It's quite interesting when you look in history what was happening in 2007 and before the crisis really hit, although some of the signs were there, certainly in the banking sector. So I arrived as chairman of BT in September 2007. And to be honest, I'd moved there very quickly from KPMG, where I'd previously been the senior partner of the firm. And I'm not sure I'd done very much due diligence, to be honest with you. It was BT and it seemed like a good idea. And I remember arriving on my first morning at 8:30, and somebody said, Mike, by the way, welcome, and there's a board meeting at 9, so we need to get on with this. And then trying to look at some of the things that came up in the board meeting, I was a little bit surprised and hadn't fully appreciated, which I probably should have done, that actually at that stage, not on its own, BT was more or less distributing 100% of its cash flow and dividends, was borrowing to buy back shares at quite a high price, which I didn't understand, and was borrowing to make acquisitions that I found out pretty quickly were not being properly integrated. So we started with some of the excesses and the sort of over-engineering of balance sheets that were characteristic of some of the many reasons why we entered this very deep crisis, which is still ongoing. And that's just sort of backdrop.
Yeah.
You then start to look, and we started to realize that in our global service business, the board was very concerned that, there was no cash coming. Normally cash is a kind of example of what you need. Anyhow, as Andrew said, it's very important at the end of the day. And our global services business was a new business because, again, it's quite interesting to reflect. What people don't realize is from the date that BT was privatized, the competition that's become. So 94% of the business in real terms that BT had at the date of privatization had disappeared by 2007. So BT had to completely reinvent itself. How did it do that? Okay, continue with fixed line. It had to develop broadband. It had to develop global services to keep scale, to pay the pensions. And in the meantime, because of its previous crisis, it had to have a 5 billion rights issue and sell Cellnet, which became O2. So you've kind of got this backdrop there of what was happening. So global services is a global business, very important in what you do in managing people's global networks. It's a very difficult business to do. It's very, it's fine margin. There are not many people who do it any event. It came quite apparent pretty quickly and very, unfortunately, very apparent by about June, July of 2008 that we had a major problem and that we had a big hole and we had some highly overvalued contracts which led to a 2 billion loss in one quarter. Now that is annoying, to be honest with you, when you arrive. And in those days, of course, 2 billion now is pretty much petty cash, minor fine from an American regulator, and on you go. But at that stage, it felt like a lot. And it was quite interesting because the trauma was pretty big from shareholders. We'd already moved on and changed the CEO to Ian Livingstone in January because, anyhow, I won't go too much, but there was clearly a need to have a real chief executive. That much was clearly obvious. It's quite interesting that advisors and others weren't happy with the concept that I was beginning to develop that we were over-distributing cash, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, the answer to your point was we ended up with this big trauma.
Yeah.
And several things happened. I think we saw, of course, a 70% collapse in the share price. And we decided to do a number of things very simply and very quickly. One is that, and we'd already pretty much decided this, we need to stop distributing cash about this and start investing in our assets, fibre, networks around the UK, and reinvest. We need to stop promising and talking about 37 quarters of non-stop growth and deliver before we spoke.
Right.
We need to seriously get on top of our costs and deal with that and try over a period of time, and it was going to take a long time, to win back the credibility of our shareholders, to win back the credibility of our workforce, to get on top of the issue, and to make some investments that would, in an infrastructure business, essentially drive for growth. And that's in essence how that happened. And we had a belief in Livingstone and I that the demand has proved out for superfast broadband would be exponential. Right. We more or less did it coming down from Davos on the back of an envelope, to be honest with you, for those who like spreadsheets. And, it was some things are about gut feel, about looking at something. This is what we have to do.
Right. So that period, of course, of crisis and coming out, several years of just delivering, on much more sensible promises, getting the ship in order, and obviously in Livingstone, and you did a terrific job of that. But of course, now as we look at BT, we see a number of new big bets, and of course, probably the most visible one, certainly for the British people here, is the fact that you're now competing head to head with Sky for the football rights, and of course that is a big bet. Other companies, Setanta, I guess ITV, had tried to take on the might of Sky and had failed. So, we teach our students about game theory at London Business School. Here is an opportunity to bid, for this prize, which is rights to football. Sky are never going to walk away from it. Obviously, it's packaged up and you can bid for different bits. I mean, help us a little bit with coming to the decision that you needed to throw literally billions, I guess. It's certainly around the billion mark, I think, in order to play in this game, which you had no experience of, where you've got a big champion who's going to do everything it can to keep you at bay.
So I think to understand that, we have to also look at the environment we were in. So if you go back 7 or 8 years when the regulation occurred to ring-fence Openreach, if you will, to create competition, bring in more competitors, this led to a reality that BT had to provide its copper network exactly the same price and conditions to all comers as its retail business used. what became apparent is it's quite clear that as people go for fixed line, and increasingly we see what people call the triple play, so fixed line, and broadband and television. And this started to emerge, and it's quite clear that Sky, who, by the way, are an extremely well-run company, had something like 95% of all premium pay TV. So after I'd got over not sleeping at night because of the 2 billion loss and the 70% drop in shares and the desire of our shareholders to fire everyone in the company practically, my next sleepless night was about what was going to happen on the rollout of broadband. That was critical, because Sky actually in a position to compete with us in a way we couldn't compete with them. Right. Because they, for example, wouldn't allow us access to Premier football rights. They wouldn't allow that. No. Because they thought that would be a threat. So they got our fibre networks, our copper networks rather, and subsequently our fibre, same terms as ourselves. And you can see the pricing competition you can have with the domination of pay TV. And what we realized was there's no point in complaining forever, which we did obviously to regulators and others, that this is not a balanced level playing field. Ian Livingstone, I remember him saying to me one day, look, Mike, we just have to be strong enough and credible enough so that we can do things. And we have to deal with sort of a number of issues, get our cash position right, our cost position right, our share price better, deal with some of our pension fund issues, which are, again, something that's really quite important in managing. And then we have to really get in a position to move forward and be on the front foot, because otherwise we risk being unable to compete. We also knew that others had failed, some had even gone bust, and you take on Sky, you have to be careful. So we were extremely careful, and we decided, the board was heavily involved. We did a lot of analysis. We kept it extremely quiet. So in the first round, not this last round, that we wanted it not to be known that we were bidding at all. And we went to extreme lengths that it wouldn't be known, because we did want to gain as much as we could of Premier football. So I think it came as a surprise to everybody.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
That we did that, and we did get not all that we wanted. We got some of what we wanted, but in a sense, I think we felt that we parked our tank on the lawn and we were going to be serious about this. And it did require a lot of other things, because we had no capability to produce television. So, we bought the company that did the production before. We took over the Olympic television studio. So we were determined to do this and get people in and do it professionally, because some people. And then we had to realize that you can't blink when you do this. You can't just do it once. Right. And so quickly we came into the Champions League negotiation. Right. Exactly. That was fast. And I don't know, but I rather suspect the question became who's going to blink first. Right. And given that we hadn't got as much as we wanted of Premier football, because Sky came in with a big bid, we were pretty keen to get Champions League, and actually we got it. And that was critical to us to be a backup. So I think this proved we were serious players in this particular game, and we think we got it at a reasonable price. Separately, we also, and there was a lot of planning, which your guys would love, in really sophisticated planning about what we were going to do with these rights, how we would monetize them. Yeah. At the same time, we bid on 4G quietly, so we got a big 4G network because we wanted to move towards mobility through technology rather than just through MVNO operations, which led to a further strategic development. So I think it was a really interesting time. And I think it kind of worked for us. And of course, it came round, and we were determined when the last round came round, which came quite quickly because the last bidding was quite late. This bidding's quite early. And you've hardly had time to prove the concept when you have to come again. And so our shareholders were very worried about escalation of cost. So we repeatedly said, in this case, exactly what we meant, that we were going to be rational about bidding. Right. Now, I rather suspect that others perhaps thought we weren't going to be rational. So the end result was we got a better deal for a 17% increase in cost, as opposed to others who paid about an 80% increase in costs. So, I think for us it's been a very carefully thought through strategy. Yeah. I think so far,
if you can find some wood
well
to touch,
executed. Right? But in life, as you well know, you need to be lucky, and Sky are very powerful and there are forces. Yeah. But what it has done, which I think is really important, is lifted the whole morale of the company. Yeah. Our shareholders have supported it. Yeah. It's turned we've been in declining revenues for years and years and years for some of the reasons I alluded to over regulation. We weren't even allowed to bundle our products until 3 years ago under the regulatory requirements. So I think retail business has grown, and it's changed the whole dynamic. And the returns we've got have been at or above our expectation. but as many of you will know, is often for different reasons than were originally, and
Right.
the bits are different, but the end result has been positive.
So let me just go a little bit further forward now. And of course, in some ways, what's coming down the track is even more scary than competing with Sky, because as I look at it, the world is moving towards mobile. That's not exactly a contentious statement. Increasingly, the venue you're competing on is going to be for super fast broadband over the mobile phone, and of course having content which you can feed to that. And of course, in that world, you're not just competing with Sky, you're competing with Netflix and Amazon, and you're competing with potentially a Google, and you're competing with all the other carriers, you're competing with the handset manufacturers, from the Samsungs through to Apple. I mean, what does in 5 years' time, what does that industry look like, and what is BT's position in that industry going to be?
Well, I think if you take it, and one's got to be careful not to use these words used a lot, but it is true, we are seeing fixed mobile convergence at a high rate. We are seeing the movement to the triple play. We are seeing massive, huge demands for data at ever-increasing speeds and reliability coming down. 3G, before it was hardly born, it didn't do enough. 4G is going to do better, but not enough. People want to be able to connect on, Wi-Fi hotspots at high speed. So you need both. 5G is coming, I think, in 2018. But the demand is just massive. And the demand for video download is absolutely massive. So if you position yourself as we had become a fixed line operator, because we'd sold Cellnet, which became O2, et cetera, you have to really look at how carefully you're going to do this. So our strategy was, we couldn't possibly at that stage have afforded to go out and buy a mobile operator. So we developed a strategy slightly different. It's about mobility. What we wanted to do was to be able to provide mobile to our business customers because they needed that, not in the consumer space. And that required us to do an MVNO, which we did initially with Vodafone. We then did one at half the, I'm not going to say what price, but a less price with EE. What we did was, so EE became our MVNO because they had the biggest 4G application. We got a whole load of 4G license capability that we won in bidding, and we've got 5 million Wi-Fi hotspots around the country. If you take the technology on 4G that's available in the conurbations and what we're developing with handsets, and you take the 5 million Wi-Fi hotspots, you're actually able for a large period of time not to touch your mobile network and go from hotspot to hotspot, and we'll be able to make that seamless in London. And then you go on to an MVNO when you go outside London, but in the conurbation. So you change dramatically the delivery capability and the speed at which you can do it. But that's not enough. So interestingly, when we did that, it became apparent that we were doing that and we had the capability to do it. That caused some frisson in the industry. So suddenly we had two mobile operators who wanted to sell to us. Indeed. So that was an interesting concept. And what we believe we want to do is to end up being, this needs to be a competitor. I mean, what people forget is because, it was painful for BT at the beginning, the TSR that it in 8 years ago, I think it was 10 years ago, has made the UK the most competitive in the world. It's got the overall highest coverage, overall lowest average speeds, lowest average cost, and some of the highest speeds, which are not uniform, which is the issue. And that's become because we've got massive competition, and that's been great for the UK. And this will get dramatically better over the next 2 or 3 years, because as you all know, superfast broadband has moved from a luxury to a necessity to a utility. It's a political issue. We can't roll it fast enough, to the whole of the UK. Everybody needs this stuff. So clearly there's a huge demand on that side of it. And we want to position ourselves as be able to carry out those investments, to be able to provide people in their homes, with superfast broadband, with television, and with fixed line in order to get that. And to do that, we need to have not just a fixed line presence, but we need a mobile operator to fill that in. Indeed. And, that's the best way we think we can do that, by getting the scale. And I think from UK PLC point of view, given now both sides of the political divide believe in industrial policy, we need strong European players in telecom. So I think there's a whole series of reasons why that's where, there are a lot of challenges in this, by the way, as you alluded to, but in execution.
So looking a couple of years down the road, I mean, it's often said, isn't it, that in a world where there's severe competition, not commoditizing as such, because of course the technology keeps on moving on, so you've got to keep on marching with it. But where the differentiation between competitors is not that great, they often say that having privileged access to content, of course, is essential. And obviously buying the rights was a big part of that, the football rights. But of course you don't own that. I mean, that gets bid up each time. Is there a time when you have to actually start owning your own content? I mean, British Telecom owning movie studios like the Netflix and Amazons of this world are doing? I mean, is that even conceivable?
Look, I mean, in the same way we said several years we weren't going to buy a mobile operator, which was true at the time, we came back when they wanted to sell to us to buy. But it's absolutely, you're right, the content is a huge issue. We do not want to be content providers. We want to be content buyers. Now, we have to watch very carefully how content purchasing goes. Is that going to become much more regional on sport? Is it going to become global? Is it going to be a huge scale issue? That we don't know yet, because there are political aspects to content and football and regional purchasing and how that operates. Are there going to be changes in that? Absolutely, there are going to be changes. What I would say is that we need to be stronger to deal with those issues. And we believe by doing the acquisition that we're going to do, hopefully vote for on Thursday of this week, that we will be in a much stronger position to deal with that and be a player there to make sure we have access to content. But we are very far from being able to produce content. I mean, we had to buy the ESPN team in order to produce content, and they were fantastic, and we gave them fantastic facilities. But we don't have those kind of skills, They're very different.
I mean, there comes a point where you've got to draw the boundaries about what you can actually do yourself.
Exactly.
So understood. Okay, look, I'm conscious of the time. I want to switch to your role as head of the CBI. And of course, with the election looming, it does present a very nice kind of sort of starting point for the conversation. So, I think it's safe to assume that most of the audience will be, shall we say, with you in terms of the types of position that you're taking in terms of an open economy, in terms of we'd love to have a government that would be favourable to broad business. But if we just start with the Conservative Party, it's quite clear that there will be a referendum if they get in, and that there's a big chunk of that party that would love us to leave the European Union. Now, please just help me. This is not quite as naive a question as it sounds, but help me with what possible reason could they want to give to leave the European Union? Because I work in a business school. We teach about free trade. We teach about all the benefits that this audience and all us, I think, can see. In order to kind of get our heads around how to grapple with this problem, you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the people who are against European Union.
I mean, to some extent, I can't answer your question, but I can give you some of the symptoms and arguments that arise from it. So there is clearly still within the Conservative Party a deep-seated division over the importance of being in the European Union from an economic perspective versus the importance of the United Kingdom being a freestanding power, setting its own destiny in a global world, and that's a political issue. I respect the Prime Minister. We advised the Prime Minister not to call a referendum because we believed it created uncertainty, but we absolutely understood it was a political decision, and him having done that, and he himself has said we worked very hard to make sure we won a referendum. So I think that element. So obviously we've spoken to a lot, and I think it is actually not all Conservative MPs because, bluntly, many business people and people outside the country look and say, "What's the matter with the UK? You have one party who doesn't like Europe and one party who doesn't like business." My answer is, I'm emigrating. No, I mean the answer is that neither are true, but both parties give a possible impression that it might be true. And one of the issues that you get to, so on the deeply Eurosceptic side, I think it's deeply political, deeply, frankly, I hesitate to say uninformed. But for example, we gave some dinners for various MPs, and you have to respect different people's opinions. And their argument was something along the lines of, listen, we have absolutely no problem with the trade, we absolutely agree with the CBI, completely right, we need this, but we don't need all this parliament in Luxembourg and Strasbourg, and we don't need Brussels. We just need a free trade thing at WTO, 100 people, there'll be lots of empty buildings in Brussels. That's all we'll need. Surely the CBI can't object to that. So that's a sort of deeply unrealistic view. Now, maybe in 1965 there was an option to go that direction, and for us in 74. However, on the positive side, it means they understand the free trade. They do understand the trade argument. The negative side is they don't believe the benefits are in excess of what they believe to be the political independent costs. Right. And there are huge misapprehensions about realities. So this issue about, and there is frustration in the population at large about, lifestyle regulation. Yep. Frustrates people. The Daily Mail doesn't like it, so it's, you've got to be dead careful. But there are issues there. There are issues about immigration. Yep. Because actually European Union opinion polls comes way down the list, but immigration comes up. So I think, there are real issues there. And some of the facts, so the Federation of Small Business did a review of irritating regulation. And, funny, surprising or not surprising, I think I can't remember exactly, but it's something like 3/4 of all regulation that irritates people didn't come from Brussels at all. It was, it was done in Whitehall and gold-plated. So we're dealing with a lot of fact-free debates.
Indeed.
Some genuine concerns about political freedom.
No, absolutely. So, and I don't think anyone will be surprised where my political leanings lie. Let's hope for Conservative government. But there is a very real chance that Ed Miliband will be the next Prime Minister. And it's very clear that he wants to intervene in labour markets and he wants to intervene in electricity markets and housing markets. I mean, how do you... I guess the sharper way of asking the question is, let's say we wake up on May the 8th with him as Prime Minister. How will the CBI confront that attempt to try to sort of push back the free market system that we've more or less agreed to in this country?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to say is the CBI's role and its importance is not always what it does in public, but its ability to lobby in private and to input, and its input is asked for on all sides, or nearly all sides of the political divide, and particularly Labour, Dem and Conservative. So we've worked really hard we've tried to persuade them, don't, make policy on the hoof, don't make soundbite statements, don't put yourself in a corner, because, we might all regret it later, but of course they've ignored all of this. They're going to do this on a daily basis, which is deeply disturbing. We've also tried to make the point, which you and I talked another time about this, that actually business does care about society. Business actually wants wealthy, healthy consumers. Why would we not? We just want to do it in a way that's sustainable. We understand that so far the benefits have not gone to the people who suffered the most. Employment's up, which is really important. Fiscal deficit is down, but it's only half the job done. Still worse than France and all the other countries we criticise. There's a long way to go, but the way to get sustainable increase in living standards is to allow the markets to operate, to allow investment to continue, to encourage that, and to make sure that business gets this, that to have a successful economy, those benefits start to go down, and that's just beginning. So that's been our mandate. We don't have any difference with you, with the TUC. The only how do you get there? Ed Miliband is a very principled man. I mean, a very intelligent man. He's deeply concerned about people in society who's disadvantaged. Yeah. He has a view that the market system has failed. Yeah, no, absolutely. And he wants to do what he calls pre-distribution around issues like education, where we've been pretty awful in education in the state sector for a long time. So he just believes that market intervention, he absolutely believes that this is what it has to be. And as we all know, price controls only lead to shortages, higher prices, and less involvement. Look what happened to Argentina 12 years ago when they introduced it. They ended up importing when they have a huge reserve. I mean, none of this stuff works. None of it works. I mean,
well,
you'd like it to work.
You're going to find too many people disagreeing with
you.
But
ideologically, we'd all like it to work, but it doesn't work.
It doesn't.
I mean, in the system we have.
Yeah. One final question on your CBI, with your CBI hat on, as it were, but it also links, I think, to your time at Barclays. I mean, HSBC this week has been pondering, or at least speaking openly about the possibility of essentially moving at least chunks of its headquarters back to Hong Kong. I mean, there's since 2007 basically, being a banker has been a pretty miserable job in this country, right? Because there's daily pressure from regulators, from the newspapers, from all sides. And of course, and I suspect you're not going to disagree with me on this one, but there is a risk that we've actually pushed things too far. I mean, I think it is safe to say that the banks got a bit out of control, and I think bankers' pay probably did go a bit higher than it should have been. But is it possible we pushed so far the other way that we are actually genuinely going to be pushing the HSBCs away?
We are doing really serious damage to the financial sector in London right now, and we have been for some time. And by the time we realise that, it's going to be too late. It's like the frog in water, and it's a serious issue. And I've spoken about it a few times, and I'll speak about it much more after the election. There's absolutely no doubt that this crisis was caused. Essentially, three groups who essentially did it were politicians and policy, regulators and banks. And a failure to deal with capital, a failure to deal with proper regulation, and encouragement of policy that led to excesses that weren't understood. We all know that. You know, the reality is politicians and regulators got away pretty scot-free, and the banks have paid the price. And we're now seeing horrible accumulation of very damaging issues arising variously from Washington, from Frankfurt, from Brussels, from Basel, and from London. And on top of that, we're seeing extortion by what the Economist refers, I should say, of extortion on fines and penalties that are disproportionate to the issues and often politically driven and by competition. You take this with the measures cumulatively that banks here are facing in relation to the capital, which, by the way, we needed, the leverage we needed to do that. Absolutely, you know, when I studied economics 100 years ago, it was 10% capital for banks. Right. That disappeared over the years to 2% or less with hugely magnified balance sheets. So there are a lot of issues there. But that part of it we needed to do. But you combine that with, you know, this ring fencing, which makes absolutely no sense. You know, yet we're the only country in the world who's done it. You know, virtually all the banks that failed were monoline banks, except RBS. They were not. The capital was not used. You combine that with something called Section 165 in the United States, which requires capital to be looked, because everyone's gone to subsidiarity of capital. You make investment banking on a ring-fence basis very difficult to do. Right. So you just reduce the activity and it goes elsewhere. Even the good part, because there's bad investment banking, if you want to take it oversimplistically, and good investment banking. So we risk here, then we get into the levy. The levy is a political tax. It's non-tax deductible. It's a tax.
And that's the real cost to HSBC.
It's accumulative. I mean, what you know, I know you know what you know that you have to live with a cumulative impact of ring fencing, leverage capital, which is why you don't need the ring fencing, and it makes no sense. You add complexity and cost. Bizarrely, in the 800th year of the Magna Carta, we've gone for the reversal of burden of proof for senior executives, which means you're guilty unless you can prove yourself innocent. Seems pretty strange. If people think that's encouraging people into the banking industry, think again. And so I think the combination of the regulatory environment, the ring fencing, when it's clearly, most people, I think most informed it's just not necessary, but it's politically necessary apparently, means we're going to lose, we risk losing significant, we'll end up in 5 years' time where, you know, the only really major investment banks will be American. Now, and if people think we can, with an industrial policy for all other sectors, not have one for banks, let the banks decline, and that's going to be good for London, that we don't have a major bank based here. That is not the way that we develop the service sector, the other things, the educational sector that we want in London, frankly.
Do you see light at the end of the tunnel here? Or do you think it's getting worse before it gets better? I mean, I guess it depends.
I think that there'll need to be, you know, I don't think this will, you know, listen, I mean, Andrew knows this, we sat in pain, you know, this was always going to be a 10-year recovery problem from 2008, you know, and I think it is. I think by that time it may be too late. I think sensible people privately know that this has gone too far, the pendulum swung too far. It was inevitable that it did, because the public anger is real.
Indeed. No,
and rightly real.
Indeed. No, absolutely.
So it's you know, we have to understand that as well.
Indeed. So look, I've got a last question before I open up to the audience, a bit more personal. You know, you sit on so many different boards as chairman of many. I mean, sometimes you come in as a fixer, where perhaps you've got a dysfunctional leadership team. Your job is to make some difficult decisions. And of course, I'm referring obliquely to your time at EasyJet, where I think, you know, Stelios was undoubtedly a visionary, but also quite a difficult person to deal with. At least that's my hunch. Give us a sense of how you sort out a situation like that, where you've got a guy who basically built the company. You know, ultimately he's no longer in charge, but he has enormous sway.
Well, look, I mean, it can be characteristic. So I think entrepreneurs who create and had this fantastic vision which Stelios had, with money from his dad, actually.
Indeed.
But he did it.
Yeah.
And he launched it. And, and he ran it till it had about 25, 30 aircraft,
Right.
which days he backed off.
Yeah.
It grew to 300-odd aircraft. This is a big business. And I think he had genuine difference of strategy. He, got very nervous about what was developing in the global economy. He wanted me in as chairman at the beginning, but I felt very strongly that as chairman of a company, Stelios had 15% of the shares. His brother and sister individually had 11% each. There were 62% of the shareholders who we represented. We had a strategy that we felt was going to work, which was mid-level growth, young planes, a great network across Europe, a good pricing policy, treating customers well, engaging with our pilots and motor workers. We brought in Carolyn McCall, who'd never run an airline.
Indeed.
We brought in Chris Kennedy as a I'd never been involved in an airline. And we just looked at it from a simple common sense point of view, about people, about customer service, about the network. And all I'll say is this, that I'm not sure I'll ever get a thank you letter, but I think the shares were then £3 at that point.
Right.
And I think they're now £18, three and 4 years later, paying a good dividend, and it had a strong balance sheet, et cetera, et cetera. All I'll say is that the share price, if we could have adopted that strategy, but the board felt it was wrong. If we had adopted the alternative strategy, share price certainly would have been up, but nothing like what it was. I mean, nothing like, and you would have lost. So it is difficult for somebody who started a business who passionately feels they still own it.
Right. I mean,
and without Stelios, it would have never happened.
Right.
And he has got, in his own way, great charisma and drive.
But you had to find a way, essentially, of marginalising.
Yeah, you have to learn. I mean, when I became chairman, I did say to him that, look, this is public knowledge, there was a shareholder agreement where he could at any point himself as chairman and two other directors, which is very strange. That got through the listing authority when it went public, really, because it wouldn't today. So I said to Stelios, look, I'm no way I'm going to be a chairman when I can't even respond to you, so you have to do away with this shareholder agreement. Yeah. Because I'm not, an interfering chairman in any way, but I'm not going to sit there, because then I'm not independent. You've got 38% of the shares of your brother and sister, and you're able to appoint yourself as chairman. This is a subsidiary.
Yeah, indeed.
In which case you need to find a different kind of person.
Yeah. Yeah. So he hired you, but eventually you had to take the decision which worked for the majority of the shareholders.
And our employees in the country.
Indeed,
yeah.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, we all fly EasyJet, and it's undoubtedly a stronger airline than it was 5 years ago. So I'm going to open it up to the audience. I've no idea what you want to ask, and feel free to ask pretty much anything you like. We'll take the lady in the second row there. I think you were the first quick on the draw there. Thank you. Lady with the white shirt. Say who you are, if you wouldn't mind.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Zarina. I'm a current Sloan. I'm particularly curious about what you said about the banking sector, and I should also say I'm ex-Barclays, who I love. And I'm kind of curious, if you could see three things change that would start to rebuild strength in the UK banking sector, what would they be?
Well, unfortunately, there's only, at a micro level, at a truly UK level, there are only two things that would need to be done. One is to back off the ring fencing, because it's completely counterproductive. That requires political courage. I agree, it's very difficult to do. And the other is to at least put a time limit on the levy. The bank levy is hugely damaging. The capital cost's enormous. What's even more important to do, actually, is what Mark Carney, as chairman of the Financial Stability Board, is beginning to try and do, is to get some, to avoid this arbitrage of regulation and capital that's going on, and subsidiarity, because it's depleting the whole global financial system. And whatever we think about globalization, hundreds of millions of people were taken out of poverty. There was good banking. And now that's really depleting in terms of funding of medium-sized international businesses. So we need to get to a stability of approach to regulation, to capital, to proper equivalence, and how you deal with that, and not subsidiarizing everything, which is going to be hugely damaging for the global economy if it goes on. That's what I think is absolutely critical. And we have to depoliticize our regulators and judicial authorities, who have, to a degree, some greater than others, become politicized.
Thank you. More questions. There's a lady at the front. Do you want to just pass the microphone? Oh, it's gone. Swift.
I can speak up.
Take the microphone. Folks back won't hear otherwise.
Hello, I'm Catherine Courtney from London Business School, MBA 33, and Director of Enterprise Policy at the Department for Business Innovation and Skills. And it's a slightly different line of questioning, but there's a narrative running out there at the moment in the media about undue power being exerted by large companies over small companies.
Yeah.
And I guess I'd be interested in your reflections on what the role of major corporates should be in promoting health and growth of the small business sector.
I think it genuinely is a really important issue, and I do think that in a whole variety of different ways, it's very important that big companies do better on working through their supply chain in a number of different ways. You know, we saw some issues in the last downturn of people being put out of business left, right, and centre by aggressive tactics. That hasn't happened to that degree, so that's better. However, we've seen, I mean, frankly speaking, the record of FTSE 100 companies on payment delays to SMEs is not attractive. And I think we need to do much better on that. I think in other areas where we know, frankly speaking, that we've not had enough practical skills in our workforce. You know, as you know, I think we've got nearly 40% of graduates in non-graduate employment and not enough apprentices. So we need, and we're developing much better. Fortunately, we've had a common approach by the last government and this government to things like apprentices and academies and so on, which is really important. And I think big companies can do much more on the apprenticeship line. I think big companies are really beginning, and the more informed ones, to understand you've got to work with your supply chain. Because there's a practicality. You know, this government, Francis Maude, has made it clear that on major government contracts, he wants 25% in SMEs. And actually, you know what? I said to our guys, get used to it. It's not such a bad thing. We've just got to work with the guys. We can't do everything. We need our supply chain. There's something important here for all of us. There are some things where some kind of, you've got to work with it. So I think your point's valid. I think we're doing better, but I think we need to do a lot more in sensitivity. Big companies have big feet. They don't necessarily mean to trample everyone in the long grass. Like elephants, sometimes they do. And I think we need to be more sensitive.
Thanks. Gentlemen, way towards the back there, waving. And yeah, please.
Thank you. Mohammed Abdulnoor. Question about BT. Now that they've solidified their position in the UK, or about to, with the sports and EE, do you see them then going international to buy, like Liberty Global, for instance? Because I mean, the UK is. I mean, you're gonna at some point you're gonna. So you're looking to buy outside?
Sorry?
Are you looking to purchase companies outside the UK?
So here it is. So I think for the moment we have enough on our plate dealing with EE that, you know, our consumer business is essentially UK based. You know, our global business is managing networks for global corporates. That's what our global services business is, about 8 billion of our turnover. But our consumer business is essentially going to remain a UK business. That's what we're trying to do in our global business. So there are areas where, you know, for example, one of the things that we obviously have to pay attention to, an issue you must have discussed at the school a lot, is cybersecurity. This is a big deal, and people are really beginning to. So, you know, everyone is looking for expertise in this area, and we need that. So in our global service business, I can see us making acquisitions in relation to supportive technologies that we need to support our networks and the running of our global networks to make sure they're resilient, secure, blah, 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 that we're using the tech, because we provide the pipes. And we'll be doing more about making sure the applications work out of those pipes that businesses can use. But so I don't see any additional major acquisitions in that sense. No, certainly not in the foreseeable future.
What about divestments? There's I read that Openreach, which is of course is the infrastructure business. There may come a time when actually that becomes a separate business.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's been a lot of sort of misrepresentation of the facts on Openreach, actually. I think perhaps because BT has become slightly more successful. I mean, the fact is that Openreach, you know, we've created functional separation. Right. Functional separation, i.e. the ring fencing, the provision of that, has made the most incredibly competitive environment in Europe, one of the most in the OECD, you know, and it's only because we've ring-fenced functionally, we've had functional separation. But who else? I mean, we started out in 2008 after all that crisis, sitting, and we set out to commit 2.5 billion into investment in fibre at a time when we were under huge pressure, when there was a huge recession. You know, we took that risk with a 13-year payback. We've done it 1 year ahead of time, on budget, And we're now rolling, I know, with criticism, because now nothing can go fast enough with the demands that are ahead. We should have started earlier, but there you go, in terms of doing BDUK to get to the remaining percentage of the country. So Openreach is an important part of being able to, finance, and us being able to help the financing to make sure it happens. So, at this point in time, it's been nothing but good for the UK economy.
Indeed.
And that's the way, nothing is forever, of course, for different reasons.
Exactly, indeed. A couple more questions, maybe. Gentleman in the middle with the yellow tie there. Do you want to just shout loudly, or wait for the... It'll be passed down to you. There we go.
Thank you. My name is Antonio Cravo. I'm an MBA 2013. I work at Standard Chartered Bank. Not question about banking, by the way.
Good.
It's about the issue of shareholder short-termism.
Yeah.
And this is something that I would like to ask you regarding your professional experience and if you ever had to deal with this issue. I think France has just, or is about to pass a law to incentivize shareholders to take long positions in firms, to detract them from just getting a fast buck and move away.
Yeah.
So have you ever had to deal with this issue, and what's your view on this?
Well, I mean, first of all, the reality is we try and live in open markets, and open markets and free markets have costs and they have benefits. I think most of us, the benefits outweigh the costs of doing that. In dealing with that open market, you have investors who have different ambitions and different aspirations. You have to, in a public company, manage that. So in a company like BT, we have 1 million shareholders, many of them small. Then we have long-term shareholders, we have short-term, we have hedge funds. You can have active. You have to manage this process. Some of it, I think, is really good. So not all activism is bad. Not all shorting is bad. But some of it, it's difficult to understand the economic value of it. But activism is not necessarily wrong. I think as a chairman, as a board, you have to really carefully listen to what's going on, not dismiss it because it's a criticism, but to really look at what it means and engage with those people to try and move it in the right direction. Of course, at the end of the day, as you know, the Companies Act even was changed, I think last year or the year before, to require boards to take a long-term view. And obviously it's much better if you take a long-term view. And if you're a company like BT, which is an infrastructure company, you've got to take a long-term view. I think the pressure comes on other companies. I think there are lots of things that are difficult. Quarterly reporting isn't always a great encouragement to longer-term thinking. I think some of the demands of short-term shareholders are such that sometimes you could be pushed into short-term decisions. So I think it's up to board, a little bit like EasyJet. We had a perfectly valid discussion, with a major shareholder. Did we, cut back, which we did a little bit, or cut back dramatically? What was the right thing to do, and how should we do it? That's a perfectly valid discussion. But sometimes you have to stick to your guns, even if you've got a 38% shareholder telling you that he doesn't agree. So I think it's dealing with those issues that you have to deal with. I don't think laws that try and stop that are necessarily particularly helpful, because I think people always find a different way to handle it.
I'm going to finish, I think, with a very personal question, if you don't mind. After several careers, you've been entitled to take life a little bit easier. Some people like to play golf or whatever. You seem to be taking on more jobs, the longer you go on.
Right.
What drives you? I mean, I can't ask it any better than that.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to sort of not do it. And I have a first belief that there's a time to come and there's a time to go in different organizations. So, for a variety of reasons, I thought it was good to leave EasyJet when I took on CBI. So I think you have to balance it. But the truth is, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit it in a certain way, because it's rather selfish, actually. I really enjoy what I do. Yeah. And I've found the juxtaposition in the last several years of being involved with the pain of the banking sector, with the credit rating agency, with S&P in New York, with BT and its traumas and crises, with EasyJet and the shareholder issues, with, what we do in the CBI is a fantastic team of people. It's just energizing, right. And when you can, in some cases with make a difference, and it's all about people, it's all about teams, it's not about, and if you feel that that's working, you feel good about coming to work every day.
Right, and of course,
but it takes time,
because you've got so much breadth of experience, people come to you with even more interesting opportunities, I guess.
Or some not so interesting.
Or perhaps not so, well, lots of opportunities. And I guess you just get to pick and choose the exciting ones, sort of.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I think my wife, my family would say that I take this to slight extremes, but, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm very fortunate in a sense because you do need, you know, where I base myself is at BT, so you do need a support infrastructure. So I think when you're doing a number of different things, as I do, in the business world, in you know, other worlds, the charitable world, and so on, educational world, you know, you need to be pretty well organised actually to do this. You really do, because otherwise it becomes logistically very difficult.
I can't imagine trying to juggle all these responsibilities. Look, we're gonna finish there. I'm gonna ask Andrew if you'd like to come up and close this session. Thank you very much.
Well, I think if you want an example of someone who can combine as many jobs as Mike combines, if you see the speed of thinking, you begin to get an idea, and I've seen that in practice, you begin to of how you can do so many things. You know, we like looking at fine ways of thinking at the London Business School. That's one of the things that we do, and this is an example of a fine way of thinking. Fast, accurate, to the point. You can see why he does what he does. Been a great pleasure listening both to the personal, if I may say so, Mike, and also to the public elements. Julian, thank you very much for posing the questions. Thank you for taking part. We're going upstairs to the conservatory for drinks, where we can carry on the discussion. Thank you very much indeed.